and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Missa Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. As you can imagine, I've talked about education with other people a lot. Usually, just mentioning that I work at a school is enough to invite an entire dialogue, or in some cases, monologue, about people's feelings around schooling. But do you know one thing I almost never hear people rank as an important aspect of education? Social skills. Though some may like it more than others, the truth is that we live in a world full of all kinds of different people, each with unique backgrounds and stories and beliefs. And in schools like Alpine Valley, kids have access to an unadulterated, real world full of diverse individuals. Not only do they get to interact with kids of all ages from different backgrounds, they also have access to adults with our own broad collection of knowledge and experiences. Adults who, by the way, will talk to them like people, not empty vessels we are trying to fill with our vital knowledge. Once, during an interview, an AVS graduate said that students graduating from AVS have a master's degree in communication with a minor in meetings. I believe that experience is, in part, because we have a small campus where students are essentially forced into proximity with one another much of the time and simply have to find a way to make themselves heard, understood, and represented. Which isn't to say that there aren't places for peace and quiet. There are, but over time we find even the most introverted students tend to gravitate towards what might be the emotional heart of the school, the main room table. There's nothing particularly special about the table itself, except that it is large enough to accommodate a dozen or so people and their lunches, and it's positioned in the middle of the school's biggest room, also the room that permits eating freely. For generations, students and staff members have gathered around this table to discuss current events, pop culture, and general absurdity. While topics of conversation range from the serious to the nonsensical, there is no one who has attended Alpine Valley School that did not at one point experience the main room table. For me, the main room table was the best part of every day. Even more than organizing parties and plays, which is how I spent most of my time as a student, I would sit for hours around that table, rapt with attention, taking in the thoughts and feelings of the people around me. It was at that table I first glimpsed some of the philosophical and political ideas that still guide my life as an adult. And it was at that table I learned how to have a real argument, not one that ended in fisticuffs or in the fracturing of friendships, but in a simple difference of opinion and a drive to understand. That's not to say that things never got heated. They sometimes did. But it was through those experiences that I learned to speak my mind calmly and without fear of reprisal. I could even test out crazy theories like, what if we just didn't have any laws at all? And walk through the realistic outcomes of that scenario with the help of adults who were not humoring me, but were truly interested and invested in the discussion. For many, the ability to choose how and when they participate in social interaction at school is truly a gift and allows these shy students to navigate social waters they might have previously shied away from. In addition, our school granted many people, myself included, access to a whole new world of ideas and opinions that they might never have experienced confined only to their own age group. My guest on the show, and self-confessed introvert, is James Kashevos. James came to Alpine Valley School later than most, at 13 years old, but not so late he couldn't pick up a few things along the way. He shares with me how AVS prepared him for a career in the IT field, and also helped him to acquire the social skills that he now relies on every day. Here's our conversation. Hey, James. Thanks for being on the show today.
Hi, Missa. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well.
Good. So why don't we start off by having you talk a little bit about yourself and your history with Alpine Valley School.
All right. Well, I started going to Alpine Valley School. I think I was 13. I just turned 13. So I had been in middle school for a couple of months at that point. And oddly enough, my part of the reason for us leaving traditional school is that I was doing the same math homework that I had in the previous grade. And I was irritated by this, and my mother was irritated by this. So we kind of were rethinking stuff just as a whole. And at the time, my mom heard about AVS from one of her coworkers, and so we checked it out and did the what is the practice week?
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, we don't do that anymore. But yeah, at the time we did at the time.
Well, at the time, I did the practice week, and I liked it. I mean, so from there, I think the next week I started. So.
And how long did you attend?
I attended until graduation, until I was 18. I was 18 when I graduated, so 5 years.
Nice. What was your first impression of AVS? What do you remember about being here those early days?
That's a long callback.
I know. You can do it, James.
All right. I don't know. I remember going there and being like, oh, I can kind of just do whatever. I mean, my first day was definitely the strangest because I even brought my homework from my from middle school, thinking that if this didn't work out, I would need to submit this homework.
Oh, wow. So you still had one foot in the other world, too, a little bit.
Pretty much. I was like, and I actually had every intention of doing it that week, regardless. This did not happen. Because pretty much I sat down at the main room table on the first day I was there, and I started talking to another, now graduate, Ethan. We got on the topic of Boy Scouts, and from there we just kind of chatted for a while, and then started playing video games. So that was, and at the time I was a huge gamer, so it was kind of like, okay, this is a place where I can kind of feel comfortable, right? Like it was like, it's like, oh, all right, I understand these people. Like these people are all normal. They're people I already have like some form of, like I can already talk to them.
Yeah, you already had something in common too, it sounds like. Yeah, so did you do a lot of video gaming while you were a student?
Definitely for the first 2 years. I spent the majority of my time in the gaming room, playing a lot of World of Warcraft. That was a pretty popular one at the time, and Halo. So yeah, I spent a significant amount of time. As I got a little older, I started spending much more of my time in the main room, and also taking on some more official duties and just kind of taking on other hobbies that I had. Not that I didn't game at all, or didn't spend any time in the gaming room, but it was just kind of like, okay, there's other stuff I wanted to pursue. So
sure, yeah. Looking back on those first couple of years, though, that you did spend a lot of time gaming, do you feel like those were beneficial to you?
Oh yeah. I actually, I'd say a lot of that time was spent. That actually part of the reason I got into IT work was because I wanted to play World of Warcraft back in the day. And at the time, I was already interested in working on computers and had been wanting to build my own gaming computer, but my current laptop did not support any sort of gaming that would. I mean, it just did not do anything. Maybe Minesweeper. So I kind of started how to figure out how to meet the minimum requirements for World of Warcraft and other games I wanted to play. So I just dropped some new memory in my laptop at the time, and that happened to solve that well enough. And then from there, I kind of it was still a terrible experience, but I was able to play the game. So I kind of just figured out from there. I at some point later bought a friend of mine's computer and upgraded that as needed, and then built my own gaming computer a couple of years later. So that's where it kind of started. Yeah, I guess.
That's great. And so did you do some of that while you were still at school, or was that mostly on your own?
I did most of the actual building and upgrading of computers at home, just because at some point I switched over to buying desktops, and that is kind of difficult to bring into school on a regular basis.
We do have some people that do it. They bring their desktop back and forth every day.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
See, the first computer I built was a full tower case, which was about half my height, and probably about a quarter of my weight.
Wow.
It's maybe not quite that much, but it was quite a beefy machine that did not lend itself to carrying around.
Yeah, that would probably not be a good idea. Anyway.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the main room, sitting around the main room table, and that being something you did, when you first got to AVS, and then a little bit later too, when you were kind of not doing gaming so much. And that's something several people have talked about before on this podcast, the sort of communal feeling around the main room table. And I would love to hear your perspective on that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just an extension of the socialization aspect. Like the gaming room is shockingly social. I don't think there was barely any times where I was in there alone. And anytime you've got a group of people, even if they're playing different games, they're talking about things. And I think that was kind of like, I think I hesitate to say the next step, but the main room is kind of it moves to a different like form of socialization. A lot of, debates about various topics, and normally, kind of odd topics were pretty common in the main room, and those are always fun to participate in. Definitely a lot of political conversations. So I think you get it seemed like it was a wider array of discussions, and at the time I had gotten more comfortable with socialization. I was kind of a quiet kid, and so moving into the main room was pretty, was kind of like, at that point was comfortable, after you could almost say that I was comfortable with the people there after having spent so much time in the gaming room, and so the main room was kind of a way to talk to even more people.
Right. It was like your conversation 102. You had moved up. Yeah, interesting. Right. Did talking about all of those things, even when they were kind of absurd, did you feel like that helped you figure out how you felt about things?
Oh, yeah. Even now, I find myself, I feel like my opinion severely lacks about any topic. Like, if I don't ever discuss it with somebody, if I form my own opinion from just, like, reading something or just stewing on it, I'll come to some conclusion, but I'll almost always end up switching it when I talk to somebody. And AVS had the easy access of a large group of people to immediately bounce ideas off of. And, like I said, I always find something that I missed, something that I didn't consider. And the main room was a place where you have people that, would tell you if there's something you didn't consider. So
Sure. And speaking of that, actually, so you came to AVS at 13, which is statistically kind of old for starting at the school. Now I started at 14, so I'm in no position to judge, but I wonder what was your feeling about the age mixing aspect and suddenly having all these little kids around.
Yeah, that's one that was, I don't remember thinking much of it when I was at school. Looking back on it, I guess I should, or at least, during the early years, as I got older, especially my last year, I was kind of like, oh, it's kind of cool to have these youngins around. Kind of being the old man on campus, was kind of fun, definitely. So it was definitely beneficial. And there was people that I met and I'm still friends with today that I wouldn't have met in a more age segregated environment. Which that was a huge boon alone.
Yeah. Tell me about some of the elected positions that you held at school. You mentioned that briefly.
Sure. I held, I guess I'll just focus on the larger ones, or possibly the more notable ones. I had to be 16. I don't know. It was a year, probably was 2 years before I graduated. I held the school meeting chairman position for a term, and one term of that is a year. And that was just, that's just running the school meeting. Just kind of making sure things stay in order. And that was a lot of fun. I only did the one term. I decided not to do it again the next year, mostly because I started doing other things like work. And I wasn't sure how often I would, if there would be things that would run into my availability. And actually, though, that next year, I did run for and served as JC chairman for a couple of terms. I think those are, a month or two? Is it 3 months for those terms?
I think that's right. That sounds right.
And I think I did that twice in my last year. And And that was a wholly different experience. It actually required much more effort than school meeting chairman. The whole daily aspect of it, I imagine, is
day to day, it's a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you a part of any of the corporations or committees?
I'm struggling to recall what. I was definitely a member of many. I mean, the Gaming Guild. I don't know if they're around anymore. The ANU I was on. I don't think I ever served as an actual chair position on that though. Let's see, I believe I was I may have been the chair of Pets Corp. But that
which is not defunct, sadly. No animals on campus this year.
So many changes.
I know. It's hard when you're gone for any length of time. So what was your experience with Judicial Committee, both as chair and as someone who is just a community member participating in the system?
It was really interesting. Actually, way more interesting than I was expecting at the time because I think I got written up twice during my time at school. So I was not that I was unfamiliar with the system at all, but I definitely didn't get to see much from the other side. But as a chairman, you get to see a lot of JC, right? And so you kind of get a feel for the things that are written up, and you even get a feel for kind of like the little like drama things that go on in the school. And it was definitely it was a very like, starting to think of how to word this. Experience, like, I guess, kind of taught perspective in a lot of ways, right? Like the vast majority of the cases, at least I think during my time there, were younger kids that were writing each other up for various reasons. And it was almost like, it was kind of interesting to be like, okay, from my perspective, these things are pretty petty, but, clearly there's something there. And it was kind of nice to be like, okay, like, I have to take this seriously. Like, this is actually a thing this is a thing that's critical to the functioning of the school. Mm-hmm. And taking something seriously that I wouldn't have necessarily done at a personal level was, I would say, eye-opening. That was just kind of a interesting thing.
Yeah, like, it doesn't seem like a big deal to you that, Sally took Jimmy's Lunchable, but it's a really big deal to her.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, I would have just handled it in some other way. Been like, hey, why'd you do that?
Right.
And only resorted to writing up as the last course of action, but...
Yeah, well, there's definitely all of those perspectives. You definitely have some students that see Judicial Committee as a last resort, and some who see it as the first line of defense, and will write up the most minor infraction. But, it's not really, as you said, anyone's position to say whether that's right or wrong. It's just how different members of the society use the system.
Yep.
Yeah. So... tell me about what it was like for you to graduate, that process for you.
That process was, it was a lot of introspection, and I hear that a lot from other graduates as well. That it was a lot of introspection for them as well. And I'm a procrastinator, like hardcore procrastinator, which I think is also a pretty common thing for people. So I ended up doing a lot of the work, last minute. Definitely stewing over, the stuff, but never actually really doing much of the, putting, ink to paper until the last minute. So there was a lot of, like I said, introspection over time, and then a lot of intense, like, oh yeah, I should probably get this done every few months. Overall, I liked my experience, especially the actual oral defense. I think that was my favorite, was going up and talking about my experiences, and then having people ask me questions that I had to come up with answers to, in the moment. I actually had a lot of fun with that. It was definitely stressful, but was a good time. I learned a lot, actually, there. I look back on that really fondly.
Yeah. Do you remember any of the questions that you got?
I don't. I remember certain people asking me questions, and I remember struggling with them, but I do not remember the contents. And I remember, like, but
But overall, the experience you remember being meaningful. It
yes,
sounds
yeah.
like, yeah. So, what are you doing these days? What did you do after you graduated, and then sort of what are you leading into? What are you doing now?
So after I graduated, I kind of traveled for a couple of months, and then I got a job working as a help desk administrator, um, for a small managed service provider. So they just do IT work for other companies. So like they get contracted out essentially. I did that for about 7 months. I started and just pretty much went to them and said, "Hey, I've done this stuff, for my own personal gain, but I've never done it professionally. So I'm willing to work for nothing practically, if you'll just take me in." And so they did. They were kind enough to do that. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot working for them. And after a couple of months, they said, "Hey, you're actually the most organized of us. So can you go and start taking over, like handling tickets and whatnot?" So I did that. That was kind of an interesting experience because it ended up being kind of managerial, which I did not particularly enjoy at the time because I was managing people that knew more than I did. So it's kind of hard to be like, "Hey, can you go do this?" when I really don't have a total grasp of what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. So I stayed there for about 7 months, and then I started interning with Aaron Cure and his company. Pretty soon after that, actually, and we do information security consulting, normally like penetration testing. At least that's
like
my big thing.
Trying to break systems, right?
Yes.
People
yep.
hire you to break their systems.
Yep. Yeah. And it really in a way that would give me data back, or like in some way that somebody could do something nefarious with it. Is our main focus. So I interned for them for several months, and then I was hired on the next year, and I've been there since. So that's been about if you count interning, it's nearly 3 years. So
wow, that's great. So you must enjoy it then.
I do. I like it quite a bit. It's I do get to break things for a living.
Yeah.
So
does it feel like a video game a little bit? Like you're going through trying to break the enemy's gates down or something like that?
Not really.
Sure. I imagine it's probably more technical than that. I'm just
well, there are definitely times where I would say it definitely feels like a puzzle. I think that is a safe comparison. There are definitely times where you're like, there's this one little thing that I need to get, and it's just like figuring out this problem, right? So that I can generally exploit something. So I guess figuring out I guess we'll call it a problem. And so I guess a puzzle is a comparison. Maybe that's a type of game as well.
Yeah. Like and what kind of challenges have you run into in that position?
Mostly just learning things. I mean, it's always I don't have any formal education on this. I've got certificates at this point, but when I started, I only had my technical background in computers, my admittedly small technical background in computers, and then my time interning with Aaron and his company. So it's just it's a process of, oh wait, can I actually is this something I can actually break, or am I just banging my head against a wall? Am I missing something here? Right? Is there something I can can I hack this? And I just don't have the knowledge to. So there's always I think the biggest, I don't know if I would call it difficulty, because it's I guess it's also one of my favorite things about it, is constantly having to learn things and constantly having to improve your own ability. Because not only is it just, there's always something, like, not only is it that it's a vast field, but there's always something new. So
yeah, it seems like this would be one of those jobs that's just constantly evolving, because people are finding new ways to hack all the time, right?
Yeah. And then you've got situations too where everybody's always adding something onto their software. So if the software goes to a bunch of people, then those people might also be subject to any issues in that software, or just you bring on a new programmer and they don't happen to have knowledge about this one security issue and they write code that's vulnerable to it. Um, so yeah, there's always something. There's always something to check. Always something to find.
Have you had any moments when you were on the job and you were confronted with something and you thought, boy, this really ties back to something that I dealt with at AVS, or like some skill that you had from school that you feel like you really get to use a lot?
Well, I still think to this day that the biggest skill I gained from AVS was like one of the biggest skill. There's actually two I would consider, but was socialization. I just kind of figuring out how to talk to people that might be different for myself. So I use that all the time. I mean, not so much. Day to day, I'm comfortable with the people I work with at this point. But there are times when I have to talk to clients and explain to them something that might be technical in a way that they can hopefully understand, and also try to be fairly clear about it. So that's one way AVS has directly benefited me day to day.
Yeah, well, that's great. Do you have a favorite memory of being at school?
I guess my fondest memories are back when I was playing games a lot. Me and a lot of the other people who would, me and the other people who would hang out in the gaming room all day would play a lot of Halo 3. Like, pretty much day in and day out for probably a couple of months. And Halo 3 introduced a mode called Forge mode, which allowed you to build maps. And so there was a resource limit on maps. So there was essentially like a money, a unit of money. And we would use this to build 2 forts. And then we would go into the map and fight each other. And this process quickly involved us making forts that were actually impossible for others to penetrate, or at least, penetrate in a way that wouldn't just be really, really irritating and make everybody angry. So we started instituting rules, and the kind of discussions that happened around that are some of my fondest memories. We were yelling at each other all the time. It was great fun.
That's good, but it sounds like, it's friendly yelling.
Oh, it was fun yelling, right? It's the type of yelling with friends, and these people I still talk to this day. So it definitely didn't hamper our relationship at all.
Well, that sounds fun. Well, James, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It sounds like you're doing some interesting stuff, and it's been great to hear about it and hear about your time at AVS.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me on here.
Oh, you're absolutely my pleasure. If you heard last week's show, you'll remember that my guest, Ellie Welshon, mentioned her experience as a student at AVS helped her learn compassion for others and to try and see things from different points of view. Here again, James mentioned a similar experience, only through the lens of the Judicial Committee. He was confronted with school meeting members submitting cases to the JC that he might not have submitted himself, but nevertheless had to deal with fairly and impartially. Not to mention, he had to do this every day for his entire term as judicial clerk, hearing testimony from all sides and ensuring that the Judicial Committee ran smoothly all the while. Seeing life from the other side of the table and having empathy for your fellow students is a skill that is difficult to measure on any kind of standardized test, and yet I think most would agree is an essential ingredient in adulthood. Students at our school get to practice seeing things from others' perspectives, and many have confessed that their firmly held views softened considerably over time through, as James said, extended discussion around the main room table. I think all of us as parents would like to know we are raising children capable of critical thought and deep empathy. And at Alpine Valley School, those are skills students practice every day. It may not always look like much, usually just a group of kids sitting around a big old conference table and eating their lunches, but give it time and the results are simply astonishing. We're rounding the corner on the podcast to our 10th episode, which is quite a milestone, and I want to celebrate with our listeners. I'd love to do something special on the show to celebrate episode 10, and I want your suggestions. Email me at podcast@alpinevalley.school.com with your ideas for a special 10th episode. I know that together we'll cook up something great. And I know that I've said this before, but it bears repeating. If you are enjoying this show, please consider sharing it with someone you think might benefit. Do you have a friend who's considering Alpine Valley School or a school like us for their own children? Do you have a relative who is on the fence about our model of education? Send them the show. We've even uploaded every episode on YouTube so that you can easily share a link or subscribe to our channel. There's even a YouTube playlist with every episode of the show so far. If you want to share a link to the show with someone else, you can visit www.alpinevalley.school.com/podcast or refer them to our YouTube page, www.youtube.com/Alpine Valley School, which has tons of other excellent content as well. Thanks to my guest, James Kashevos, for sharing his story here today and for not hacking our website. I'm Missa Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks with more stories of real learning for real life.